So, I have my official tie on. This is a very official conversation we want to have. So there's no gameplay in this. If you are watching this video expecting gameplay, I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to get it. This is a discussion video, and for a very key reason. So Tide Time just came out with a video talking about Decisive Strike. And I want to address this. Decisive Strike in the game right now is a very powerful perk that almost every survivor runs. I say that exaggerating slightly, but most survivors, regardless of what character they are, whether it be a Lori or a Claudette or a Dwight or a Jake, is going to run Decisive. And looking through the amount of builds that you will see, I have Decisive on quite a few survivors. I may have it on all of my survivors. I don't know. It's important to understand why Decisive Strike is such an important perk. So let's go to Lori, and let's explain how Decisive Strike works now. And I want to explain this. Okay. Ignore that first line. After being unhooked, Decisive Strike becomes active within a limited time, between 40 and 60 seconds. If the killer grabs you, that's picking you up, grabbing you out of a locker, or off an object, you will get a skill check. If you hit the skill check, the survivor has 5 seconds to run away while the killer is stunned. Hit the skill check, fail the skill check. Doesn't matter. Perk is gone after that. And you become the obsession. Why is this important? Decisive got a much needed buff that I want to address. Decisive used to work completely differently. Decisive worked like this. Okay? This is our Decisive Strike right here. Okay? Decisive worked in that all 4 survivors could run Decisive, but only one, the Obsession, got the value of it. That Obsession, when they were downed by the killer and picked up, got the skill check. But the condition was different. So normally, if a killer grabbed you right now, they get the skill check before they're even put on shoulder. Now, Decisive works differently. That's how it works now. Decisive used to work where the killer had to pick you up, fully put you on the shoulder, and start walking for it to work. This led to the infamous dribbling. Pick 'em up, drop 'em, 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 in order to force them to miss the skill check or to not get the skill check at all. This meant that the killer completely countered your perk. You couldn't do anything. Decisive was also affected by enduring. Decisive also had a 3-second stun, and enduring cut that in half, which meant a killer perk on top of you even hitting it would counter it. Decisive only really worked for the obsession. If a non-obsession, for example, Feng Min, runs this perk, Feng Min would have to wiggle to 35% and then get the stab skill check, by which time the killer has already put you on a hook. Decisive really only punished killers that tried to get you to the basement, or that tried to take you to a farther hook. Decisive also was not a guarantee for the survivors. Survivors had no real way to guarantee it, because it only worked the first time you were down. It activated immediately when you were picked up, which meant it only activated the first time. You didn't have value. If the killer was a Leatherface and he downed everyone at the same generator and everyone ran Decisive, potentially the killer could just burn Decisive on every single survivor in the game at the beginning of the game. Situations like that were rare, but entirely possible. Now Decisive's in a good spot. It's broken and overpowered, but it's better. Decisive has 2 buffs going for it. But unfortunately, Decisive got buffed in 2 ways. Decisive got buffed like getting a free plane ticket that let you skip the line at the airport, and when you got to the plane, it ended up being first class. That's how bad the Decisive buff was. So Decisive used to only stun the killer for 3 seconds. This got buffed to 5. This made it so that it could be used with other perks. For example, Head On, which only needs 3 seconds to activate. Decisive works now as an anti-tunneling perk. Now, there's 2 changes I can bring to Decisive. But I want to talk about the second thing that's very important. Decisive got a stealth buff. You don't have to be the Obsession to use Decisive. For example, I can now be Feng Min and run Decisive, not be the Obsession because there's a Lori there, and I still can use it when the situation comes up. Now, first off, killers do have the option to wait the 40 to 60 seconds before they pick you up after tunneling, but we're not going to talk about that. That's a rather ineffective strategy. Why I want to talk about this is the value of the perk. Decisive didn't used to have value. Decisive was a perk that one person randomly got to use. Decisive had a 25% hit rate, and there was about a 25% chance you got it off. It wasn't a valuable perk to me. When I used to play Lori, I would run Soul Survivor in my build, because Soul Survivor would allow me to counter Barbecue during the end of a game. If everyone else was dead, I could cut out Barbecue and Nurses if need be. I would run Soul Survivor instead of Decisive because I didn't like the value of it. And that's the common thing with Adrenaline. See, Adrenaline is a high-risk, high-reward perk. You're playing with 3 perks until the end of a game, but you are guaranteed to get the benefit. You're guaranteed a Sprint Burst and a Health State Heal if, and only if, you make it to that point. And yes, you can be countered by NOED, but you're going to get your Adrenaline first. That's the killer punishing your perk. On a build like this, with Dead Hard and Decisive, I will need that Dead Hard if the killer runs NOED, but I have to get the Adrenaline to find out if he has it. But I'm guaranteed to get my Adrenaline if I make it there, unless I die on second hook after the gens pop. But you get my point. Adrenaline is so commonly used because it's a guaranteed value. You won't be able to use it until you reach that point, but once you do, guaranteed. Decisive wasn't like that, and Decisive still technically isn't. The killer can entirely avoid picking you up and you won't get your Decisive. But you do get 2 opportunities at the middle to end of a game to use it. Or if another teammate decides to farm you without something like Borrowed Time. It's designed to punish killers for tunneling. And a common thing that a lot of people say, survivors expect the killer not to tunnel. That's what survivors want. Survivors want the killer to use a perk like Barbecue and run away. They're like, okay, so I've been hooked. As I hook a survivor as a killer, I'm now supposed to go to the other side of the map, let them get off hook, get healed up, then come back and chase them. If the killer is playing how you, the survivor, want, you don't get to use Decisive. That's the common thing I see. But Decisive has a stealth bonus. I started to talk about this, and I got sidetracked. But we're going to talk about this for a minute. You see, Decisive had a stealth ability to it now that it didn't used to have. In the old way, Decisive was an obsession perk. If there was an obsession in a game, someone had Decisive. So the killer knew that the obsession was going to have Decisive. No one ran Object, no one ran Soul Survivor. You did not see those perks get run back in the Decisive meta. But now, you don't know. You don't have to be the obsession to get the effect. There's no more get 35% wiggle meter and then stab them. You just get the effect. You see, there's another perk in the game that can be quite easily fixed called No Mither. No Mither causes you to be affected with the broken status effect. This means the killer sees you are injured at all times. And they know you're going to get up if they leave you. So they're never going to leave you. They're going to pick you up, put you on the hook, and you're fucked. The only value to running No Mither is because it means you're guaranteed to have Dead Hard unless you're exhausted. You're guaranteed to get Resilience because you're always injured. You're guaranteed to get something like, I don't have Quick and Quiet on him. I have it on Quentin, but you're guaranteed to get a perks that only activate when you're injured. Now, there's a very small change that Decisive had. Any survivor can run Decisive. Now that means that there can potentially be 4 Decisive Strikes in a game. 1 Obsession and another 3 people that have it. But it also means that the perk is hidden. You don't know what survivor has Decisive. Someone could, like this person right here. Let's say he's a Jake. He could have Decisive, but I'm the Obsession. It's happened before, and it's a common occurrence. And there is actually an add-on in the game. Do I have it on him? I do have it on him, called the Unique Wedding Ring, that allows you to decrease your chance to be the killer's Obsession. This means I can run a key, which makes someone else the Obsession, and I have the Decisive, meaning they will avoid picking them up, but they'll pick me up, and I get the Decisive. You see, the reason why I mention that is because of a little perk called No Mither. No Mither could be fixed very easily by, instead of causing the survivor to be broken for the duration of the game, it causes the survivor to be exposed for the duration of the game. This allows the killer to have great counterplay. The killer doesn't know if you have it. The killer downs you with 1 hit. They're thinking it's a glitch. They may have a perk, like Make Your Choice, Noed, Devour, Haunted Ground, that gives them an exposed effect, so they may think that that perk has just worked somehow. They may be an exposed effect killer, like a Mike or a Ghostface. They may have an add-on, like, I don't know, Huntress or, Clown. They may have a power that lets them insta-down, like a Billy or Leatherface. They would not know that you go down in 1 hit. The survivor would go from healthy to dead on the first hit. And then when the hot survivor gets pulled off hook, they would be injured. There'd be no broken, they would be exposed. This meant that the survivor could be healed, even though there'd be no reason to. Why would this be important? The killer wouldn't know you're running No Mither. A common thing is that the survivor starts the game as being full health, so they would look like this. They would look like that, and then all of a sudden they got hit 1 time, and boom, their build changes to this, and they have No Mither just randomly appear. But then the killer is going to know and tunnel you for the rest of the game. That still does not fix the problem of No Mither. The exposed effect condition does. The killer wouldn't know until the end of the game. And you would still get value. The other survivors wouldn't even know until the end of the game. So no more messaging a random solo player when you're in a survive with friends because you ran No Mither, you fucked the game over. You could give them the Decisive treatment. Now, how do you fix Decisive? Decisive is a very easy fix. There's 2 things you can do. One breaks the game, but makes Decisive a bit more manageable. The killer has complete counterplay to it. The other is to just revert one of the changes. Reverting the 5-second stun isn't necessary. Neither is making Enduring no longer just be for pallets. If you revert Enduring back, you're countering a number of other perks like Head On. A simple solution is to remove the DS Head On combo. Simply put, Decisive Strike no longer works when the killer grabs you. Decisive Strike works if the killer picks you up off the ground. That means you can't get it off of being grabbed off of a totem, chest, window, vault, pallet, gen, or out of a locker. No more jump into a locker, get pulled out, Decisive Strike, jump back into a locker, head on and get out. Oh, adrenaline pops and I'm full health. Removing that, making that change, would make Decisive no longer a guarantee. If you go down immediately to get the Decisive and the kill out in the open with nothing around you, the killer is going to know that you probably have Decisive and they don't want to get stabbed. Another change is an entirely different story. Another change... It's on Ace? I think that's on Ace. Would be to change... Oh, it's not on Ace. Hold on. Who do I have one? Quentin. Would be to change it and turn it into a party starter. Make Decisive a one-time use ability. It's an item, a small item, held in your hand, looks exactly in a killer lobby like a flashbang or a key would. It's a little pocket knife. When the killer picks you up, you press X, it immediately stuns them. It's a one-time use item. If a survivor attempts to use don't drop your controller. If the survivor attempts to use the item a second time, the item breaks and doesn't work. Well, what would happen to Decisive Strike then, you ask? Decisive Strike gets reworked. Decisive Strike enables you to pass a skill check when or press a QTE, like press X, whenever the killer walks through a pallet, which will drop the pallet on them, breaking the pallet instantly, but getting you off of their shoulder. This works in a situation where a killer walks through a pallet to try and get you to a hook. For example, Killer Shack. The perk activates only once per game, and only if they walk through a pallet. It removes the pallet as well, so it can't be abused by a survivor then. And it would grant the killer a stack for something like Spirit Fury and Enduring, but it wouldn't prevent the killer from walking through pallets as often. I mean, the biggest problem right now for killers is they try and pick a survivor up and carry them only for someone to run in front with a frickin' flashlight or a pallet to stun them. There's two changes you can make. You can make Decisive Strike into an item and give killer survivors the ability to run an item similar to Decisive, but that would also unbalance the game. You would instead be trading off all the survivors running toolboxes for all of the survivors running Decisive. Or you could just simply make Decisive harder for the survivor to use. You can't combo it out of getting grabbed out of a locker or getting grabbed off a gen, which would also buff your stealth killers like Ghostface. See, a common thing right now, and one thing that I love about this build that I have right here, is near the end of the game, if there's one gen left and I got hooked next to it and I get pulled off the hook, I'm not going to heal up with self-care. I'm going to get on the gen and wait for the killer to grab me off. Use my Decisive, they're stunned for 5 seconds. That means I have 4 seconds to get on the gen and pop it for adrenaline to activate and get away full health, with a burst of speed that they can't catch me on. This build is very powerful. This is a meta build, but a killer can very easily counter this. If this build, for example, does not work if the killer plays the proper way, according to survivors. Survivors should never have to use Decisive if the killer is on the other side of the map when you're unhooked. And this limits the use of Decisive. So Decisive Strike is not a broken perk. It is an overpowered one, but it's in no means broken. It received a buff that it needed, and an additional one it didn't.